last session of the day. Thanks for sticking with me. Hope you had coffee at the last break. I'm going to try and pack a lot of information into the next 20 minutes. I'm probably going to move relatively quickly in the hope that I'll leave a little bit of time for you guys to ask me questions and to tease out whatever doesn't make sense because I went, no doubt, too quickly through it. So I was asked to kind of begin to map out the funding opportunities or the funding ecosystem for social enterprises. And I know you've been talking about that a lot, but I am going to start from kind of the starting point. And at first I want to start from how I got involved in doing this work and where I'm coming from with the stuff that I do. I got really, you know, I think for all of us as change makers, it's funny how people come to develop their passion. And I really had an opportunity to find out what really drove me at an early age when I spent a year in the US on exchange as a 16-year-old. And that was really influential for me at the time, because it was a chance to kind of get away from my context. And I was really struggling at high school, to be honest. Like, I wasn't doing very well. I was getting kicked out of class a lot. I didn't really know what to do with myself. And then I went away for a year. And that really was clarifying for me, because it gave me the chance to kind of encounter a whole lot of people who had different perspectives from me. It stripped away my context in terms of my family, my school, my friends, and kind of helped me identify what was left when all those things were removed. But in particular, while I was there, I had this unusual, fortunate experience to go to a conference called the State of the World Forum. It was this kind of post-Cold War powwow as people tried to figure out how to even talk about international relations anymore. Most of you are probably too young to remember, and I almost am myself. I mean, I was 16, so I hadn't really been paying a lot of attention up until that point. But prior to that point, the only way to talk about anything was to talk about the Cold War. You know, you couldn't talk about peace and war without talking about the Cold War. You couldn't talk about trade and development without talking about the Cold War. You couldn't talk about the environment and sustainability without talking about the Cold War. The Cold War was the context within which every other issue was discussed. And then all of a sudden it went away, like really incredibly quickly. And people literally didn't even know how to talk about what we were doing as a global society anymore. And so they thought, well, let's get together and figure this out. Let's have a chance to let's have a powwow, guys, huddle in. And they brought together a whole bunch of like 7 different Nobel Peace Prize winners, multiple presidents and prime ministers. Reagan, Thatcher, Gorbachev was all there. It was like the whole gang was back together. And I think kind of late in the piece, they thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we're talking about the future to have some young people here? But they didn't have the time, the inclination, the budget to do a global search for young leaders who would deserve to be in that room, in those conversations. And so they did, you know, the smart thing, which is they partnered. And they partnered with the world's biggest exchange organization, AFS, which is the organization that I happen to be on exchange in the US with. And so I happened to be selected as the Australian representative to go to this event. And I was one of 32 young people from 28 different countries. And we kind of rocked up on the first day and they said, thank God you're here. You're here to represent 3.5 billion young people. We're so thrilled you're here, because otherwise, you know, their voices would go unheard. And so my mind kind of melted. But I had this extraordinary week as I began to kind of get to grips with what that might mean, that maybe I am, you know, maybe I can represent my generation, maybe my viewpoints do matter. This extraordinary experience of having important people with, you know, a lot of runs on the board, a lot of influence, stopping and listening to what I had to say. And I had no idea about anything, is the truth. But nonetheless, they were willing to give me a go to listen to what I had to say, you know, as a young person, representative of 3.5 billion young people. So I walked away from that experience with this very contradictory sensation. On the one hand, I felt very deeply personally empowered. All these cool people had listened to me, you know, and for the first time I had that real feeling of like, that sense of your voice mattering, you know, that core feeling of empowerment when people actually pay attention to you and listen to what you have to say. But as I began to reflect on that feeling, I realized that I had been the beneficiary of a fundamentally broken system of youth empowerment. That this is how youth empowerment happens, traditionally. It's haphazard, it's tokenistic, and it's biased towards wealth. That while the 32 of us had this seeming diversity in coming from 28 different countries, every single one of us had parents who could afford to send us to America for a year on exchange. And so what I've been trying to do ever since then is build better opportunities for more young people, and then eventually for all people to have that experience I had, to be told your voice matters. Your experience, your perspective matters, and we need you to be involved in creating the future for all of us. And so that took a number of different forms. By the time I finished university, I founded 3 nonprofits that were all focused on that singular mission, but pursuing it in different ways. And the third of those was an organization called VibeWire, which I led for 8 years and grew to have, at its peak, kind of offices in 4 states. It's back in Sydney now. And what we did, or what they still do, is build opportunities for young people to express themselves on the issues and create the cultures that matter to them. And so I did that for a whole bunch of years and did a whole bunch of stuff that we thought was really cool. We had a film festival that toured around the country with films made by young people. We sent youth reporters out on the campaign trail during the federal election. But then we had this idea one day of, wait a minute, what if we haven't got all the right ideas? Shocking, I know. You know, what if all these kind of opportunities we're designing for our peers are not the right opportunities at all? So how do we take one step back from that? And instead of just saying, here's something we prepared for you, here's how you can get empowered, how do we instead go, how do you want to be empowered? What is it that you want to be? What is it that you want to create for yourself, for your peers? So how do we provide you not just with the opportunity to participate in something that we've designed, how do we resource you and support you to design something for yourself? And so that way of thinking turned into the first co-working space in Australia, which was then called Square One, now called the Common Room, still just for young entrepreneurs under 28. And this, in a way, was my first experience of social enterprise. Because while I had a startup grant for this, it was only a startup grant, and it had to then run itself based on charging people to be there. You know, so we had an earned revenue model, we had sponsorship, we put on events, we charged people, you know, by the seat and by the desk, in the hope that that could remain sustainable beyond, you know, beyond the requirement to bring in the next grant. But mostly what I did while I was running Bytewire was figure out where the next grant was going to come from. I estimate I spent 50% of my time for 8 years writing and quitting grants, meeting with people who might give me a grant, reading up about other grants, and all the rest of it. And I got a bit over that. When I left Bytewire, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with myself, and I ended up in an organization called Ashoka, which I haven't got time to tell you about, but if you're not familiar with them, you should look them up, because the guy who founded Ashoka, Bill Drayton, invented the phrase social entrepreneurship. He's literally the person who described for the first time this thing that 30 years ago no one really knew how to talk about, which was people acting in very entrepreneurial ways, but motivated by social purpose. So this was, in a way, the very start of beginning to try and map out and understand this hybridization of social change, that it no longer conformed into these highly traditional silos. And after that, I founded Start Some Good, which is a platform, once again, to support change makers to rally the resources they need and to build the community they need to make a difference. And what excited me about Start Some Good's a for-profit social enterprise. And I was really excited about that because I thought that means I don't have to write grant applications. Because I hate waiting. I'm not big on the waiting game when it comes to grants. I actually enjoy writing them because that's a chance to kind of formulate my thoughts and describe my vision on a page. And that's actually quite helpful for someone that can be slightly scatterbrained as me. It's a pre-made formula that I can kind of slot my thinking into. But then I'd hate waiting for the yes or the no. How dare you, you know, cast judgment on my ideas, sir? And so what I like about social enterprise is that it's about getting on with it. Like Peter said, it's the people who often survive are those who figured out how to get on with it without waiting for that big yes, without waiting for that gatekeeper. Refuse to let anyone else be your gatekeeper is the attitude you need to take. There are no gates. There's just a wall you need to walk through. And no one else is going to open it for you. And so I was excited that perhaps we could create, you know, value, and then people would share a portion of that value back with us, and we would be sustainable based on that. Now that's been a bit of a dream, and I've spent quite a lot of the last 2 years fundraising anyway. But that's why I'm here to tell you about the different ways in which we fundraise for social enterprise as opposed to traditional nonprofits. So the question that we start with is, who is it that is responsible for creating change in our society? And we all know what the traditional answer is, which is it's nonprofits, charities, right? That's where those are the groups who are tasked or expected to be focused on the common good. You might say government as well, which would be a very fair answer. Companies, meanwhile, businesses, somewhere completely different. They have a different job in our society, right? Their job is to maximize profits for their shareholders, traditionally. And this is the traditional map. And we hope that they balance off. You know, we create wealth here, we try and paper over cracks here. But social enterprise is this idea that you can actually bring these things together, that you can do them simultaneously. And that opens up a bunch of exciting new possibilities. One of the things that opens up, though, less excitingly, is an endless definition debate as to what is a social enterprise. And I don't really want to get into it, other than to describe it as a doing, not as a status. I don't care what your tax status is. I don't care if you're a non-profit or a for-profit. I'm not sure I even care if you have a legal structure at all. I probably do, actually. But you know, I'm happy for you to get started without one. I think one of the great mistakes people make is incorporating. See how lean you can be because you don't even need you don't even need a legal entity. So while you can define it in a whole lot of different ways, I think the simple explanation is that they make their impact by trading. It doesn't matter what your legal structure is, it matters what you do. and that you make your money by trading in a marketplace. Now, you can absolutely be a for-profit, or you can be a non-profit, but it's that you no longer rely on grants. That said, grants is a type of marketplace, but you're trying to do what we tried to do with Start Some Good, which is to say, can we create a product that will deliver social impact, or at least raise money that can then be used to deliver social impact, and will people pay us for that product? And can we grow and sustain ourselves in that way? And so you'll see there's a spectrum, and on the one hand, you have commercial entities that are beginning to embrace what gets called blended value. And at the other end, you have charities that are beginning to embrace earned revenue. So whether that's, and when I say beginning to, they've been doing this for a long time. Think about the opportunity shop networks, the Salvos and so on. They've been doing this stuff for a long time, but it's certainly a growing trend. And then in the middle is this thing that is the most new, I think, which is organizations that don't just trade in the market in order to make a profit and then redistribute that profit over here so that other people can do good with it. They actually do good in the same way as they make money. Does that make sense? So, I want you to keep that in mind, that there's these two types of social enterprises, redistributive, and I'm not sure what the alternate phrase would be, but those who derive their impact from their operations. So redistributive social enterprise would be something like the Oxfam shops, let's say, or the Salvation Army, although they do some good of their own operations, but it's more about where the profits go. So in essence, it's kind of traditional philanthropy, just without the temptation to keep it for yourself. Traditionally, I make lots of money, I'm a good person, I give some of it back. So this structure just cuts out that opportunity for me to do the wrong thing with it and links it straight to the organizations. That's cool, but to me, less exciting than organizations that have actually designed a business model that can produce change, even if it doesn't, all it needs to do is break even. All it needs to do is sustain, and that impact will be created. So to give two examples in the Australian landscape at the moment, both Melbourne examples, but I'm hoping a few of you have heard of them anyway. I'm a bit more familiar with their Kinfolk Cafe, which is in the Donkey Wheel House building where Hub Melbourne is, if anyone's ever visited that building. It's a redistributive social enterprise. Its impact is entirely created by how much profit it can create and then where it sends that profit. Versus Street, which is another chain, which is another set of social enterprise cafes, but their impact is created by employing homeless young people. And so they could create no profit at all while still creating enormous social impact, provided they don't actually go out of business. They need to be sustainable. Anyway, I've got to speed up. So however we call this or define it, it's been produced by a number of trends that are going on in the marketplace. And I won't walk through all of these, but in essence, the big picture trend, I think, is that people are no longer willing to compromise. And this is this whole, in a way, millennials, Gen Y thing. They're so annoying, they don't compromise, they want everything to happen right now. But the positivity around that is that millennials, I think in particular, are unwilling to accept these silos in their life. That I do good over here, but I just think about myself over here. They want to bring it together. They want a job that is meaningful. They want products that do the right thing by the planet. But they also want those products to be as good and as affordable as any other product. Social enterprise Mark 1 was, here's something that's not as good, more expensive and less convenient, but it's better for the planet. Can you please purchase it? Social enterprise Mark 2 is, here's something that's as good as all of our competitors, but also better for the planet. That's the Tom shoes. It's cheaper and better looking and better for the planet, theoretically. And so if you can build that together, you're in a really great place. And equally, from the entrepreneurial side of things, people are no longer willing to make that trade-off either. No longer want to spend 40 years building wealth and 20 years doing good work with it. They want that all to happen simultaneously. This has created real threats for business as usual for charity, because people no longer sign up for lifetime commitments and no longer think about social good as a single lifetime pursuit focused around a particular mission or organisation. So where people used to sign up to a small number of organisations and have deep connections with them, a Rotary Club, the union, a political party, the Amnesty group that you get together with once a month and write letters, now we follow 300 different organisations on Facebook and another 3,000 on Twitter. We get emails from multiple organisations every single day, and it's this noisy environment whereby we no longer, where we pick and choose the opportunities that appeal to us and resonate with us today. And I remember when I was running VibeWire and we were reading a lot of research about how young people were involved in social change at that time. And what was really emerging and what's been born through in the decades since then is that they conceptualize social impact as a series of projects, which is the same as they conceptualize their careers. Where people once used to think of as a career as like a 40-year get the gold watch. Now they think of it, this sounds like it'll be good for the next 2 years and then I'll review. And they want every 2 years a project that engages, inspires, challenges. And they want the same for their social impact work. So how do we fund this stuff? Is the really big question. Well, traditionally there's only been a few groups. There's been government, there's been kind of sources of capital tied up in foundations, religious institutions, universities and so on, and there's been rich people. And that's generally been the name of the game. And the problem with this picture is that as a cohort and as a sector, they're too conservative. And I don't mean conservative necessarily in the Gina Reinhold right-wing sense, I mean conservative in the risk-averse sense. And so when it comes to social impact, everyone has wanted to fund proven innovation, which sounds sensible and is, but someone's got to fund the unproven. When we think about the great where wealth has been created in terms of commercial startups and commercial business, it's the crazy bets. It's the stuff that doesn't seem like it should work. It's the stuff that doesn't accord with business as usual. It's the stuff that is unproven, that is actually where transformational change happens. And that's what we lack in the social sector. We lack funding, we lack risk-tolerant funding at that early stage that will allow us to prove what works and what doesn't. Because once we prove what's worked, there's lots of people who are willing to fund it. So social impact funding, I think, is a similar challenge to food. People often act as if we need more of it, and I don't think we do. The problem with impact funding is the same problem, the reason that hunger persists is not that we don't have enough food, it's that it's badly distributed and often wasted. And that's exactly the same with funding for social impact. There's plenty of it. It's just that we're not deploying it in the most effective way. I was at an event recently, I asked if I could borrow this slide, because someone gave this beautiful presentation on the growth of the social impact funding sector, and this is really interesting, and I'll share this, by the way, so you don't need to memorize this, I'll send around through the organizers a link to this presentation. And it sounds really awesome. There's these sorts of people who provide this funding at this stage, and then at a slightly riskier stage or less risky and all the way along. And this is a beautiful intellectual map of what a social enterprise funding sector could look like. But it doesn't work like this at the moment because there's a massive donut hole in the middle of it. There's money up here and money down here, but there is very little activity in the middle. There's a lot more talking about impact investing at the moment than there is actual impact investing. I saw a great talk from Ann Lee, who's one of the leading impact investors in Southeast Asia recently, and he started with, if anyone tells you they're an impact investor, ask them how many deals they've done. Because for the majority, the answer will be none. They're an impact investor aspirationally. And they'll say things like, I'm evaluating a few opportunities at the moment, and we're just doing due diligence, and everyone's doing that, but very few people are getting off the fence. And part of the challenge for that is that we want to prove that impact investing works, right? That it's not crazy, it's not just for hippies. And how do we prove that? By helping people make money. And so if our focus is on proving that you can make money and you won't lose money, it means we're drawing, all the money's going towards incredibly risk-averse projects. So refurbishment of buildings, and then renting them out at slightly reduced rent. Renewable energy projects with 20-year supplier agreements already in place. Important stuff, but not transformational. It's not going to produce breakthroughs. So we need to fill this hole in the middle. We need capital that is prepared to fail 90 times out of 100. The successful impact investors in California, they literally assume a 90% failure rate. Because it's only by betting, by betting on stuff with a 90% failure rate that you're going to end up investing in Uber and Dropbox and Facebook. And so to give specific examples, these three organizations are sitting on millions of dollars in capital that they would love to deploy. I don't know if anyone from any of these orgs is in the room, but anytime you ask them, they'll be like, we would love to make more deals. We cannot find enough deals. Because the criteria they exist under, they're kind of in this maybe yellow, maybe even orange. Their criteria is actually pretty traditional. They would like to put their money towards social change projects, but their actual criteria is very traditional. Like CIFA, Social Enterprise Finance Australia, their job is to be a debt lender. Their slogan is innovative lending. Their challenge is that they do no innovative lending. Because the criteria they've been saddled with are very traditional commercial criteria. And so if you don't have a building, you're probably not going to be able to raise money from them, because they need that collateral. So who has buildings? Big nonprofits doing traditional work, great organizations, I'm not disputing them, but of course none of the startup social enterprises who could potentially, maybe 1 out of 100, really change the world. They don't have buildings. They're not going to be able to access this capital. And so it's unsurprising that crowdfunding is beginning to be the bridge between projects, between really innovative, risky projects on the one hand, and the capital that does exist inside organizations like SVA or Foresters or CIFA, or the individuals who want to get involved in the space, but are a little bit worried about, is it too risky for me? It is beginning to emerge as the bridge, while we wait for everything else to fill in, that can help people prove that their idea does work, and can help get that initial bit of momentum, that initial proof point of validation that can then access these other types of capital. So whether it's open source mapping in Nepal, or the first social enterprise food truck in Myanmar, which just launched, the food justice truck in Melbourne, which is a social enterprise providing subsidized food to asylum seekers down there, Right Near Me, which is an app that allows people to share food Locally in Australia, Jamie Green, who launched One Night Stand, or SMAC, Soft Monkeys Against Cancer, lots of different ideas, lots of different approaches to creating change. What these guys all have in common is that they were able to inspire a community to support them. And so I haven't had a chance to get much into the practice of crowdfunding now, but to touch on it just briefly, they succeed because they know it's not about crowds at all. That if you go into crowdfunding thinking there's a crowd out there, you're destined to fail because there is no crowd. What there are is communities that you might be able to inspire to become part of your team. That crowdfunding is not, we prefer the phrase peer funding, but that linguistic horse is bolted. Because it really is about peer-to-peer, building community. Who's prepared to help you pull your vision in the right direction? And there are people who are willing to do that. And that's really the kind of involvement you want. That's what sustains social change in the long term. Is while social enterprise has the promise and the opportunity of blending that value, so it's not just about social outcomes, it's also a product you want to buy. And in so doing, we can access much more of people's wallet. You know, if you can take my caffeine budget off me as well and put that towards social use, that's a great source of funding versus just my philanthropy budget and everything else. But what we really want is for people to care about what you're creating. Not just ask what's in it for them, which is the traditional question investors ask, and fair enough. They're deploying their money, they're taking risk, and they want money back. They know what's in it for them. But the real supporters who are going to fuel your innovation are those who are not asking what's in it for them. They're literally asking, what can I do for you? And I just love this quote from one of the social entrepreneurs this is a social enterprise that founded through our site. And of course, people come to our site because they want money. You know, but in many cases, they realize it's not really the money they need. What they need is supporters. They need community, they need backing. They need belief in them. And so I just love this quote, because he said, you know, while he came for the money, what he's realized is that it's that community of supporters. The money is spent. You know, this guy raised money 3 years ago, so that money was gone. But what's carried them through since then is this community supporters who were willing to sign up to be part of their team and try and help make something happen. And so it's when you can create that feeling of ownership, when people really invest in a project, that you can really make amazing things happen. And so the question you should all ask yourself is not only what is the change that you want to create, but how can we do that together? Thanks very much.